Hello YouTube, this is Alan from Economan at YouTube, and I'll be covering the questions asked in my previous video, opening the floor for you guys to ask any questions you have on paint. The concept of this, after seeing other people's YouTube videos outside of this community of question and answer videos, I thought this is a good opportunity where a lot of people ask me questions via PM, and I can share their issues and my answers where other people may have the same problem. Just a bit of a disclaimer first. I don't consider myself as a professional or expert. I have been dabbling with paint and modelling for a few years now and do have the resources and experience to play around. The answers I give are my opinion and what honestly works for me, or I found through other colleagues and research. Some of the masters or senior modelers may disagree with my theories, but whatever advice you do get, either from me or anyone, test it out first on a bit of sprue or a small amount of paint before you invest a lot of time or money. We'll get straight into it. I won't mention everyone's name. First, this is from a PM, and I wasn't going to cover any PMs, but this one's okay. Gunpla Nut wanted or had an issue of not being able to buy the Tamiya rattle cans in America. He emailed them a year ago and they were repackaging them and said they should be on the market soon. He still hasn't received word or seen any new stock come back on the shelves, and my answer to him was that Hong Kong does export them at a reasonable price via shipping or freight. You can find them on eBay by shopping around, and the trick is that you buy them in bulk or large amount and you work out a deal with the seller to get the shipping costs down. The biggest downside to this is it takes approximately 30 to 45 days to get from Hong Kong to wherever you are around the world. Now straight into the questions. I am a rattle can painter and I have been trying to get a true chrome finish with Color Automotive spray paint. I assume this would be lacquer. But I'm getting a frosted blurred finish. I have tried other chrome paints and they blur when the top coat is applied. I remember not to use enamels over lacquers. I use lacquer and acrylic over chrome, which is also a lacquer. So what am I doing wrong? Now, I remember reading this happening before on Gundam Australia forums, and this has happened to me as well when I was using alclad. Apparently when you put a clear coat either by hand painting or spray painting tries to dry as quick as possible, and if a clear dries too fast, the layer doesn't have a chance to dry, and this may distort the finish of the metallic, and because it's not clear right through, it will give more of a frosted look like a lens instead of a clear effect. At this stage you want the paint to dry slower, which is impossible to control out of a rattle can, so either hand painting or airbrushing will have to do. Another precaution, if you are hand painting or airbrushing, add a little retardant to the acrylic or the lacquer. Tamiya does an acrylic retardant, so you can use only a tiny amount. And this is the Mr. Hobby. You should be able to buy this from most hobby shops or online. Retardant slows down the drying time. Be careful not to add too much or the paint will not dry at all. Unicorn X Gundam. I have some bottles of Gaia Color. Gaia is a lacquer paint. I think it's exported out of Hong Kong. I've seen a lot of these in Japan. that closed tight, but a few days ago I found some with the paints being very sticky and the bottle half empty. Is this a common issue? I've never happened with me with Tamiya. Tamiya is acrylic or enamel, so they don't dry as fast as lacquer. Lacquer dries from the thinner evaporating out of the paint. Now, I've got a couple of bottles of Gaia, and once you take the lid off, there's a little plastic insert to make a vacuum seal. If you lost that little plastic insert, this is probably why your paint's drying very quickly. Mind you, it's not much of an issue, and it is very common with lacquers for this to happen. All you have to do is reconstitute the paint by adding lacquer thinner in to fill it up to the top again, and giving it a good chance to dissolve and give it a very good mix. There's a chance when it completely evaporates that any additives will also disappear, so again, a little retardant may help in slowing the drying time down in the bottle. The beautiful thing about lacquer is, if let's say you open your lacquer paint and you let it completely dry out to a solid hard mass of paint at the bottom of your bottle, if you were to refill it with thinner, you can still reconstitute it. Mind you, you cannot do this with acrylics or enamels, as their drying is more chemical based and not evaporation based. So Unicorn X Gundam, don't worry mate, just add some thinner and your paint should be fine. Strider Prime. I have been dragged into a question about enamel paints. I kind of figured out how to airbrush using acrylics and lacquer base paint, but what about enamel? What level of thinner do you need for this, and can any airbrush will do, or do you need a specific type of airbrush? Generally with airbrushes, if you can thin it to the consistency of milk, you can spray anything through it, including gravy powder. In fact, if it's going to stick is a different problem. My experience, I use a lot of acrylic and enamel, and with enamel you thin it down just as much as you would with your acrylics. The beautiful thing about enamel is it's a lot more forgivable with thinning than acrylic. You'll notice when you thin acrylic, it gets a little harder to airbrush because it's quite splattery. If you do the same to enamel, and if you lower the PSI, it can be a lot more forgiving. So I assure you, Strider Prime, that enamels are very easy to airbrush, and so is lacquers, which is the easiest paint to airbrush. Next question. I have been using Tamiya paint and I really like it, but I've noticed that once the paint is dry, there is still a period where it is really easy to scratch or rub off. But after a week or so the paint becomes rock hard and isn't easily scratched. What's up with that, and is there any way to speed up the process? Thank you. I've very lightly touched up on this in paint theory, and there's two stages to paint drying. Once you apply it and it's in a wet liquid state, it dries to a solid state, that is drying. Once in its solid state, it needs to follow a chemical reaction, and this is curing. It requires for the resin in the paint to harden with the hardener. This is the longest state and can take a while, a few days. With curing, it depends on how well you mix the paint and the thinner ratio. You can't really control it, and there's nothing that can really speed up that process besides mixing it properly so there's an equal amount of resin and hardener within the paint, including the other additives and thinner. It's a good observation you have made, and the thing with this hobby is patience is a virtue, so thank you for that. Gundam UK. Quick question. When panel lining onto Tamiya clear spray using black enamel, roughly thins to around 70-30, the lining looks fantastic while it is being lined, but after drying roughly 6 to 8 hours later, sometimes fades and sometimes fades to a horrible dusty grey. Some panel lines also mysteriously creep out a bit, making the finish a bit rough. Any tips? If you know the YouTuber Ghost of Xeon, he's recently done a fantastic tutorial on panel lining. I recommend watching that. I'm going to put the link to that video at the bottom of this video. But I've, from my experience, which I mostly use acrylic pre-mixed ink, when I do use enamel, sometimes that horrible black frosty mess can happen when you thin down flat enamel. When you're inking with enamel, it's best to do it with a gloss-based paint. Generally, when I see a lot of tutorials of people doing it, things can go wrong. So after it sort of dries, you want to do a little cleanup with a cotton swab and some thinner. But all in all, I recommend watching Ghost of Xeon's video. He'll give you the best advice for that. Next question. I've been using Mr. Hobby's spray primer for a long time, but after realizing I would have to order it by the case, as those tiny cans usually don't go a long way, I started buying the pots of surface to thin myself and using my airbrush. I've gone through the same problem. But it seems like I can't get the thinning right. Sometimes I think I have it down, then the next time I do it the same thing, it will spider web all to hell, or leave a gritty finish. I really want to use lacquer more, but this is maddening. I had the same problem, and when I was using lacquers myself, I was thinning them very similar to how I would use acrylic or enamels, which you don't put too much thinner in, too much and it splatters. Yet, funnily enough, when you're thinning lacquer, you need to put a lot more thinner into it. A good ratio with Mr. Hobby or Tamiya, I start off with 50-50, 50% thinner, 50% primer, and sometimes I'll still add more thinner in and give it a good mix. Make sure you are using lacquer thinner and not some other thinner for like Tamiya or whatever, because of course that would be a horrible mix. But thinning it down as much as you can will give you a very easy going spray pattern, and it shouldn't be that maddening. If it doesn't help, let me know if there's any more problems. Zombie cool painting. Love to get any tips of gloss coating a mini using acrylic varnish. Do you need to thin it? What brand do you use? Being a miniature guy, I assume you're after hand painting. There's a lot of varnishes on the market. The Tamiya acrylics are very clear, and it has a nice finish and a very durable strong coat, so it sort of helps reduce wear and whatnot. You don't really even need to thin it. If you just brush it along very smoothly, you don't really get streaks with this brand of paint. But if you want to tone down the gloss effect, then by all means thin it down, and you can also play with the finish by adding a little bit of matte finish into the gloss to get whatever effect you like. So that's what I recommend. I also recommend looking into Pledge Future Floor Acrylic or any alternatives if you live in America or any country that can easily acquire it. It's very similar. It's already slightly pre-thinned, but being a very cheap product with a large quantity is always a good thing. Next question. Could I use automotive paint on models without damage? And if so, what brand? Going to a hardware shop or an automotive shop to buy paint for modelling is not a bad idea. And there's a few people on YouTube that has done experiments. Popular brand is Rust-Oleum, or whatever the other guys like what Vegeta used to use or what Prime 92 is currently using. If you live in America and you go to Walmart, they're easy to acquire. But if you're anywhere around the world or looking for a brand, any sort of paint that's artistic lacquer. Lacquer is very safe for plastic and models. When you're looking at automotives or general purpose, some of them will say safe for plastic, metals, blah blah blah, but when you're priming, the primer will always protect whatever that's stronger that you apply on top of your model, so it should be okay. A warning though is automotive primer can be very very thick and flat out detail if you use that in a rattle can, so you probably only want to stick to hobby primer sprays. Skinny Skull 13 asks, "Hey bro, I'm a newbie to your channel and I would like to now if you have any advice on spray painting enamel paints. Thanks in advance." I have mentioned this briefly on my tutorial on spray cans. I personally really dislike using enamel spray cans. I find that it has a curing problem and sometimes a temperature problem that may leave with a finish that has a lot of bubbles in it, or it's quite gritty. I don't have any advice, I'm sorry to say, except for canning it and looking at lacquer. If you still like to use enamel spray cans, unfortunately I'm going to have to recommend you to look at another outlet or tutorial site. With a Google search, you shouldn't have too much problems. I do apologise. Gunpla nuts again. I've been trying to do panel washes with enamel paint over lacquer with no success. The problem is when I try and I clean up the excess, the enamel thinner I use, Testers, also takes up the underlayer. I have allowed the colour coat gloss to dry for 48 hours before I use the thinner. What am I doing wrong? I've been told try mineral spirits to thin the enamel and take the excess up. Will this solve the issue? When I normally use enamel, because there is always a risk of damaging the layer of paint, I like to apply multiple coats of top coat or clear top coat. If there is any chance of damage, it's going to be damaging that coat first before it goes underneath. That's a good start, and of course the panel wash will be a lot more smoother. Secondly, I don't know much about the Testers enamel thinner. It could be very strong, potent stuff. A lot of people use lighter fluid or white spirit. Give that a go. You could have a lot of different success. Should resolve the issue. If not, again, get back to me. And as per the other question on washes, have a look at Ghost of Xion's video. My friend Reuven from Robot Adventures, did you ever figure out how to use that hollow colour shifting paint where you look at it one way and it changes colour of angle view of the other? To tell the truth, I have been playing around with that during the Chisei project, the Mr. Crystal Colour. It worked very, very well. I haven't really done a formal video showing it off except for the review of the Chisei project. The Mr. Crystal Colour pearlescent effect is really effective. It's the best I've ever used and played around with. Secondly, my friend Dr. Cranky has mastered how to use the Pearlex pigment. He used a tiny little scoop and mixed it in a whole jar of Tamiya clear, and that worked very well for him. That would be very easy to airbrush. A third experiment I saw, which was by, I think it's Crap Monkey, if not it might have been someone else, the alclad brand one, which isn't a clear, it's a solid colour. That effect was also quite amazing by just airbrushing that on. One day I would be interested in trying and comparing the three products together, but for playing around, they're very easy and straightforward. You either get the clear that you apply on an existing coat of paint. If not, it would already be a solid colour, which is the case with alclad. I suggest you have a little play around yourself, Robot Adventures. You'll have a lot of fun with it. Next question. Is drying the paint with a hairdryer really bad? What is the worst that could happen? I've tried this before. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but it's going against, it's not a good advantage for you. If the paint takes a while to dry, and if it is a little streaky or whatnot, it gives it a chance when it's drying that it'll level out and look a bit flatter if you are hand painting. If you're airbrushing, it's not so much of a problem. It generally dries faster. The biggest mistake you can make with a hairdryer is the paint finish may look slightly uneven by moving the actual wet part of the paint around the surface that's already dried. And secondly, being styrene is not very good against heat, you can melt some pieces or damage the paintwork. If you're extremely careful and you do small bursts from afar, it could work, but really being patient and allowing it to dry naturally will give you the best finish. So I'll let you decide for that, but personally after a few years I've decided I don't like it and I like paints to dry naturally. Next question. Top coating metallics. Some people do it, others say top coat will at best remove luster, at worst eat away at your finish. What is your take on this? What about when applying decals over the metallic like alclad and Mr. Metallics? The fact that it eats away at the luster, I've never seen that personally. Like the first question, there is a chance that if it dries too quickly it will frost up a bit, which is a problem. But with alclad, which is a good example, it sells its own brand of top coat, and I noticed with the lacquered clear it has, it's a very, very slow drying, almost as slow drying as Enamel's, and that brings out a beautiful finish with the metallic. You can either dull it or make it glossier. It shouldn't take away the luster as well. With decals, of course you want to protect your decals and put it on a glossy surface. I've personally never had problems. Just make sure that you're using something that's slow drying. Again, I've recommended the retardants. Just have a little look and play around with some test pieces and see what you think. Honestly, I don't think it's much of a problem. Now, Box Buyer 2008 asks, painting in higher humidity, pros and cons. Airbrushing is a definite con. You're going to get too much condensation in your compressor. Even the water tap may struggle and can ruin your finish. With hand painting and spray painting can also be some problems. I understand there's some countries out there like Malaysia, for example, has a good portion of the year high humidity during the summers. You might want to go on a forum or a community that has a lot of modelers in that area and ask what techniques they follow or what times a year is best for painting. I'm very lucky in Melbourne that we either have very dry summers and the winters don't get too cold. So as long as I'm indoors, I can almost paint any day I want. I'm very sorry I don't have a lot of advice, but I generally avoid humid days, and when it's quite high, I just don't paint. Box Buyer 2008 has asked a second question. Do all putties work the same? Is there a specific putty for acrylics or enamels? What's the best fast drying? I'm not 100% sure where you're going with this question, but I assume if you have a putty underneath a paint, is it going to affect the paint on top? or is the paint going to dissolve or affect the putty underneath? There is many different putties out there with different advantages. I've been wanting to do a video on it, but generally the putties are very strong against all sorts of paints, and even when you put primer on top, which some primers can actually be a putty, it has no effect on it, and you put any paint surface on top. If you are using putty to sculpt or fill in seam lines, and you sand and wet sand your model, you're going to get a marbly look. Of course, you want to prime to get a even finish. Alec 236 and a heap of other numbers. Hi, I heard when thinning Tamiya acrylic with isopropyl alcohol, it will make the paint finish look more flat. Is that true? It's generally exactly the same as the Tamiya brand of thinner. It's not true, and even if it was the case, you could still add a top coat to even out the finish of your choice. It's perfectly safe. I wouldn't worry. If you do use a lot of thinner, you're just going to need to do multiple layers to build up the luster and the finish. We got Darth Womp. He had 2 questions. I'm only going to answer one. Is there a way to get a mirror quality chrome finish while airbrush, similar to the metallic finish Gunpla kits, such as the Hakushiki? What brand would you recommend to achieve this effect? Thanks. You can get similar effect, not an exact effect. The kits Bandai produce with that effect is a foil. It's pretty much like attaching a micro thin real metal on top for a real metal finish. Of course, real metal will give you the best finish, but in a lot of people's tastes it's far too shiny. A lot of modelers you'll see who has metallic finish kits use alclad. It's a premium metallic paint for modelers and produces the best natural metal finish in scale. You get them in little glass bottles and they export them out of the States. They're generally very expensive, so you don't want to waste a drop, and they're pre-thinned. They're very good to look at first. Buffable paints by Mr. Hobby is a cheaper alternative if you want to play with something on a cheaper model. Also, Kototsu Ginsan, which is a buff on metallic finish, does very good metallic surfaces, but they're generally very dark and generally always looking the same. You can't really do much with them unless you're playing with smoke or clear smoke or clear paints. But your best bet is alclad. This next question is regarding thinner. When one does a panel wash with enamels, how much thinner in comparison to the enamel am I supposed to use? Because you can't tell until you paint, but then it's too late. You want a watery finish, so if you're doing pin washes, it just easily runs and flows like water. I like to do about 60-70 part thinner to about 20-30% paint to run very smoothly and very nicely. I do have a tutorial on sludge washing, and also the video by Ghost of Xeon down below is a good indication as well. Next question. Best primer to use, like brands, light grey or dark grey or white? That's a very good question. Different primers have different uses. Some primers are quite thick and they're known as microfillers. You'll know the Mr. Hobby ones as the 500 grade one. What it will do is if you're doing a lot of scratch building, sanding, whatnot, you're going to have little bits of damage, dints and scratch marks. It will fill those and give you an even flat surface. Sometimes you'll want a primer that's very thin to get the natural look and finish of the bare plastic of the kit. Naturally, of course, the lacquer types of primers are the best. The grey is quite neutral and can take a lot of the dark or wider spectrum of colours. You would want to use the white primer if you're using light colours like white, because the grey colours can dampen them and not become as bright and nice looking. I'd recommend playing around. I use a few different primers myself. My favourite is the Tamiya brand because even though it does go on very evenly and smoothly, it has a slight micro filling ability to it. When I want a good micro filler, or if I'm using a resin kit, or I've done a scratch build, a good old dirty cheap Automotive primer with a lot of thinner in it, in a very wide nozzle airbrush, is pretty good, but you probably want to do a little sanding back because the finish can be slightly gritty, but this is of course to your advantage. Have a little play around. You probably already have a primer on you. Every time you want to purchase a primer, try something different and have a little play, knowing that you have your micro filling type and your very thin type. Have a talk to your hobby shop. This is our last question. I want to keep to acrylics since I paint inside. Are there any good acrylic primers I can airbrush with? So far I only know of Vallejo. Any other options? Also, what would be the safest for indoor airbrushing top coat I could use? Is Tamiya gloss and acrylic, and can it be airbrushed? Thank you for sharing your knowledge. No problems, mate. There are a few on the market, some not available anymore that used to be in the wargaming realm. I'll list the three that I do know. The first one is the Citadel base paints. It's a fairly new range they've had. I found it to be not very good. It doesn't grip quite well, and the airbrushing quality is quite rubbishy, where they recommend water as a thinner. If you have any desires to try it, I recommend against it. Another one, the Italian brand Life Color, which is similar to Vallejo. They have a primer in a small bottle. I've never tried it, but if it's anything like their paint, it's not bad for hand painting or airbrushing. To my knowledge, Vallejo is the best acrylic primer on the market. I've seen many modelers use it, including the Military Modeler magazine, which has some of the best modelers in my opinion in the world to contribute to it. It has a range of colours as undercoats, or if you want to use it as the base coat. The only problem I have with acrylic primers is it doesn't have an etching property for metal. So if you have any multimedia kits that has a metal piece, or you're painting a pewter figure, this can be a problem, but easily solved. Mr. Hobby, it'll be in a very similar bottle size to this, has a clear metal primer. All it is an etching solution. It's very thin and you just slop it on with a brush. It has a bit of a smell to it, so you could just go outside, quickly dash it on with a brush, run back inside and do the rest. But looks like you're already fairly happy with Vallejo. I would stick with that. The second part of your question is the top coats. You recommend Tamiya. Tamiya is a acrylic, but it's alcohol based, so you use isopropyl alcohol or the Tamiya brand of thinner. I find it to be very good. It's very strong and durable, slightly scratch resistant. It can be airbrushed. I've had a lot of success with airbrushing, but also the Vallejo clears are quite nice, particularly their finishes. I'm a big fan of their matte and semi-gloss. So you've got a few options there, and Thank you very much for watching. This looks like it's going to be a fairly long video. This is the conclusion. Thank you very much for watching. I've shared as much as I could. It probably is a bit of a rambly video, but I've answered all your questions. I definitely will be interested in doing something like this again because it seemed fairly popular idea. Probably also another subject such as building or whatever, but paint is mostly the subject that people have a lot of questions to. And doing a little research, it's good for me to circulate this information freshly from my head again. I am rambling now. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, as always, not just because of this special occasion, you can always PM me or ask questions below. Catch you next time.